Can you lead us on worship? And I'm like, no. I'm the most inadequate. I'm the most inept. I carry the theme of a joyful noise with the emphasis on the noise until God really shifted my heart in a season. And I'm going to share my journey. And it's interestingly enough that there's been on this journey of stuff, this last week, I've been in 3 different events where everyone's saying, share your story, share your testimony, share what God's done on that journey in your life. And it was in one of those encounters that I was actually writing out where God was leading me in this process. I thought it was, profound where Chris is. So I'm just going to share a lot of information from things, right? They're points that they've been relevant in this journey that I've been on in these last 4 weeks looking into worship. And I'm going to highlight why they stood out for me. So disclaimer, this was my journey. This is what I've learned. Doesn't mean it's true. Okay? So if there's some things that are shifting or challenging or stepping on paradigms, great. I'm serious. Great. Go to the Lord. Don't shoot the messenger, but you can if you want. It's fine to get glory in heaven. But the fact is, go where God wants you to go to find his truth, his answers for your heart. Okay? So I'm just saying, some of the things may not even be the doctrine of the congregation, but it's things that God's been pressing in as I've been pressing through to discover what it really means to worship in all of my failures. Okay? So with that, we'll kind of move forward. Again, I'm not the expert, but it is my intention to share my inquisitions, my discoveries, investigating what does it really look like, where it is. Now, I've got 70 pages of notes, right? Right? And for those who know me, they're like, man, this guy's whatever. And there's people, I've gotten resources and books, and I just love the information. But really, it's more than beyond the information. And I know that you only remember 10% anyway. So it's not about the information. So I invite you to discover his presence. And I'll start off with, I was going to use later, but I'll start off now. So I met my wife, wasn't my wife at the time. When I met her, she was doing ministry and everything else. And I was joining in. I was learning how to do this inner healing ministry, bringing in. And I am all about intentionality. I am all about goals and objectives. I'm all about meeting the needs. And I said, so how do we know if they get breakthrough? Right? Now, would that be a common question or request? Right. And she says, I don't care if they get breakthrough. I care that they encounter his presence. Because if I'm the source of the breakthrough, they'll always come to me. And I want to show them they can go to God. Now, for a pride-based guy, that hit to the core. Because it really isn't about me. It's directing them, directing us to his invitation. And that's really the heart of worship. So, and I'm checking to make sure I'm going. So, to make a sermon right, okay, I got my 3 points. They're all with P's and everything else. So, the first thing is kind of introduction, kind of share some things about the foundation of what some of the things I was discovering. And then we're going to talk about position, posture, and participation. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of other P's that go into this too that you can throw in there if you guys want. And that will be your opportunity. But then I want to lead us into application. Because if we don't take what we learn and sow it upon our heart and walk it out in truth and in love, then we're a sounding gong, and all this time was great, and we can all go have coffee and donuts afterwards and move on with our day. But as Chris mentioned, he wants us to encounter and be changed. So I'm going to challenge you. And I'm not going to agree with you. You're not going to agree with me, and that's okay. It's really to go and seek out the Lord. So we all have a story. We all have a testimony, right? So we've gone through tests and always checking to make sure everything's up there and things are working better than the other time, so we're good. So I use some terms. These are what came up for me. I don't know if they're completely accurate yet, but with all the stuff that was going on. So my first 20 years, I will say, is a religious indoctrination. I was baptized. I was in the church, campus life, baptized in the Spirit, as in through an introduction for my mother's benefit, right? I was there. Yes, ma'am, I'll do whatever that looks like. Then daylight savings time came. in the fall of 1979. Here at Fort Lewis, 2nd Ranger Battalion, got on. This was back when we had the little clocks that don't set in preset times. So I looked at my clock, the alarm went off, and I went down and brought up, raised Catholic in the foundations of this. An uncle that's a priest, 2 aunts that are nuns. There's only 2 people that carried on the birthright, right? So in this process, I was going through this action, and I showed up. And I ended up being an hour early, and in that community, it was the Protestant service. I said, okay, well, I'm here. I'm not going to walk all the way back and then come back again. So I just sat and listened and heard. And then I stayed for the Catholic service that came afterwards. And that changed a lifestyle, or a style of life, because I then routinely went to both. Because it was really hearing and knowing 2 different aspects, one familiar and the other challenging. Then there's the next 10 years, spiritual intellectual. I was baptized twice. One for my mother, because that was the thing to do, and another because of the group of the people I was with for acceptance. See, it was all about what I did for others. It was all about how I looked good for others, not about how I was inside. And the first one, going back to the religious indoctrination, it's interesting how this baptism journey, spiritual maturity, also aligned with worship as the Lord was unfolding. So the first 20 years, worship was doing, just showing up, going, and being there. The next 10 years, worship was entertainment. It was exciting. And it was interesting because I really loved one song that I've heard, and I asked Chris to do it, and I researched it. That's what I kind of do. Petra. Well, gee whiz. This was back in 1983 in our church when they first came, before they were on the big road. And this was the song that they sang. So it was kind of, interesting. But worship became entertainment. It became exhilarating, exciting, prominent, and everything else. But again, the reason for doing it wasn't about God. It was about feelings and emotion. The next 10 years was spiritual professional, I call it. I wasn't baptized that time, but I did professional Sunday teachings. I'd go to Sunday schools, I would learn, I would go, I was involved, and it was all about knowledge, understanding, looking at truth, reading books, all that kind of great stuff, which isn't bad. But my worship, or the reason I also say professional, is because my Christianity was conformity while at work. And the worship was a sense of just going along, doing what everyone else was doing. The next 10 years was intellectual religious. I was baptized again there, but that was really more for my sake, for me to learn and grow. And at that point in time, I was also looking at the fact that there was a religious authority. But worship at that point in time was now performance. It was looking good. It was doing the right things at the right time in front of people so that I would get that acceptance. And by the way, that was something I longed for, to get my value, to get my worth, and get my acceptance in pleasing others. Well, I also believe that's what I had to do for God. I had to do the right things to please him. The next was the emotional, I want to make sure I was, So the next one, emotional relational. This is where I actually started healing and realized that my emotions could almost be trusted. That I could actually start to express what was on the inside and let it show up on the outside. I was baptized around that time for a recommitment and declaration of freedom and the emotional healing that was taking place and the new creation of who God was making. Worship then started becoming relational. I understand that there was a presence of him and a presence of me, and they could collide. And that was a risk. I'll say the last 5 years is spiritual relational. There's no baptism. And again, so let me clarify. It's not about baptism. Okay? You don't have to keep getting baptized. That's not the emphasis. The emphasis was that my heart and my mind were changing and the recognition. Baptism is a mitzvah. It's a cleansing. It's a restoring and renewing. Okay? And it's an outward expression of what's on the inside that's shifting and changing. As I mentioned before, there's going to be some paradigm shifts I may bring up. This was my journey, not yours. It's not what you have to do. What you get to do is ask the Lord where he's leading you and be on that journey with him. So I wanted to make sure that that was clarified. So again, there's no baptism. It's not about doing. It's not about performing. It's about connection. Being in connection and an invitation with him. Worship then became an encounter. And that's what I want to welcome you along this journey. And figure out where my notes are at. Okay. This is a model that I've taught in several different areas and everything else, and it was introduced to me in transformation. And we look at this as the be, do, have model. So as an example, we do certain things in our culture so that we have or gain certain things, so that we become certain things. I've gone to school, I've done grades, I've studied, I've written papers, I've done all these things to have these grades, to have this access, to have this certificate, to have this advancement, so that I become titled, lettered, dominion, position, whatever. So the more I do, the more I have, the more I can become. And my life becomes about doing. What's fascinating in me in this discovery, and this isn't part of the model they teach, but I understood this is the earthly realm right here. This is the foundation we live by. The more you do, the more you have, the more you become, your value, your worth, and success is defined. But it's interesting that Yeshua, Jesus Christ, went to the Father first. He escaped from all the things early in the morning and went into the presence of God. He was in the beingness of God's presence. And he did whatever he saw the Father doing ahead of time. It wasn't about what he needed to do for himself. It's what he saw the Father outlining the journey for him, that therefore he fully became that in the moment. It was out of his beingness that he did. And whatever he did is what he gained glory unto God. And it was a transformational shift for me. Because I was always built on being a human doing, not a human being. And God changed that. He is the apex, not me being the foundation. So denominations. Now, this is a total shift here in a little bit, but this is a part of a leadership project I was on. And I had a missions outreach to Liberia as part of my seminary work and everything else. And I was going to go take the Living Free course, and there was going to be 50 pastors, leaders, and about 70 different denominations. And it's like, that's a great opportunity. And I was still kind of in that performance-based aspect, by the way. But at the same time, I'm also teaching my daughter that this thing called fractions. And it was interesting because what I started learning is the number on top is the what? Numerator. The number on the bottom is the? Interesting word. What's the root of that, by the way? Think about it. So the one on the bottom is the one that fractures and divides. And it's where we get the word denomination. Right? Everyone kind of get that aha moment. So I like to throw some tidbits out there. So you may not be able to read it as well on the slide because I didn't want to make it as bold and everything else. But again, the top number is the numerator. The bottom number is the divisional divider, which is denominator. And the purpose and intention is to show the partitional fracture and division. To emphasize, in fact, the fracturing and division and what's left. Yet it's interesting that we could either choose to be 1/7, 1/7 effectiveness, or 7/1. It's our posture and our placement, right? It's the positioning. And 1 then becomes an integer or a whole number, which is also a unit, which is defined as unity. So it's interesting how we can just make a simple shift in our perspective and then be 7 times more effective. And this is really, let's see where I'm at. Okay, one more. And this is the problem that we have, is that we have fractured ineffectiveness. Now, I was going to mention and I mentioned that we were going to say a little thing about Tembi's father came up and says, depending on how all this goes, first of all, I long to give you guys the presentation over Good Friday, like Yeshua, long to have that Passover. I didn't long for this time. I dreaded this because of the risks, okay? And I'm okay with that. But as I share with him, like he said, her father said, Dan, hey, this may be my last sermon I ever give, okay? Because the greatest division among churches is worship. I was in a church divide because they moved the piano from one side to the other side. Because on this side was the organ that no one ever used, but it was the sacred cow. And it was being displaced with this new movement. And all of those who knew, who dedicated, donated, and esteemed that position to include the plaque that was on it were in uproar. I've been in several churches as well. Worship leaders come in and they start a movement of bringing in the presence, the issuing in, and people are threatened. So again, depend on how you take this, that's okay. But the fact is, take it up with the Lord. So first of all, let's look and see where this thing of worship is in Scripture. And I'll tell you that I only looked at worship. There's also praise and thanksgiving, okay? The Psalms is a great indication of where all this is. And you notice that most Psalms are written in a song, right? And all Psalms are written out of a place of pain as well as victory. From the mountaintop experiences to the lowest valleys, to include, lo, I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, to a higher place, elevated, ascending into his presence. The whole purpose of the Psalms is keeping our sights and our eyes focused on him, shifting our focus and worshiping him all throughout the journey, the good and the bad. And as I was telling, and I was talking with Stephen earlier, Stephen Pratt. For those who don't know, he leads an encounter in worship. He has a heart and a presence for God's anointing to fall within worship. And if you really want to know the presence of worship and process, he's actually going to be sharing some things, but every other Saturday, he meets in his home, open to step in for those who want to experience an encounter in worship. Now, I was with IHOP, International House of Prayer, not Pancakes, and we did a methodology they called Harp and Bowl. He has a methodology that he follows called the Song of the Lord. Each are spontaneous worship, beginning with the Psalms, beginning with scriptures, and allowing Holy Spirit to move the message in the congregation and the positioning of the atmosphere. As he mentioned this morning, we were briefly talking, which I've also heard as well. It's a conversation, worship. It's a conversation between the bride and the bridegroom. It's intimacy. It's exposure. It's rawness. It's recklessness in love. So I may have seen this slide before. I used this during the Passover, but I thought it was an interesting one to bring up because the whole thing is, guess what? This is the first time worship is even mentioned in the Bible. In the Exodus, when Pharaoh says, go, worship your God as you have requested. So the whole thing about that plagues and everything else, and there's a whole things we talked about before, but the essence of it, because they had a desire and a need to worship their God. And finally, they go and to go worship. And I apologize. That's not the first place. That's just a good place, and that's Exodus 12. The first place was actually Abraham and Isaac taking up his son. And this is the first place worship is the word in the Bible. Is this, though, really the first concept? Is it the first concept? It's the first place the word is used, but is it the first concept? Because as he was taking Abram was taking Isaac up the mountain. First of all, it's powerful. He looked upon where he would ascend to worship God. There's some topography in all of that. And there's also some definition to our heart. But as I was reading and studying some things, it's interesting that maybe there is a different place of initial worship. And that's when God walked in the cool of the day. Now, this is the reference of when the sin entered in. But the fact that wasn't the first time God walked in the cool of the day. It was a daily occurrence. And when is the cool of the day? There's two things that I notice being an infantry guy, and that's stand to and stand down, right? And that is when the sun's going down, everything drops. That's the beginning of the new day, by the way. And when the sun's rising up, for whatever reason, there seems to be a coolness that comes upon the land as well. This is not scriptural. This is my belief, just saying that. But most likely, since the day began at sundown, and it's a coolness in a part of the day, it's likely that's when God encountered, when God walked at the beginning of the new day. That's just an opinion, okay? But the scriptures set us up for reoccurring themes. During this time, the Shekinah glory came down. The Shekinah glory was present, which I like this picture here because there's kind of that radiant light of presence entering in. And that's exactly what Chris was talking about during this encounter of worship this morning. So, biblically speaking, and I got it somewhere else in my notes, but there's 160 times worship is used. The last time's Revelations. Interesting, the first time it's used is Genesis 22. The last time it's used, Revelations 22. Now, I'm not saying the numeric factor of the book, the chapter 22, is relevant, because it's not, because they're self-imposed. But it is a fabulous coincidence so that I, in my simple mind, can remember that he begins it in chapter 22 in the first book of the Bible, and he again ends it, bookcases it, in the last book of the Bible in chapter 22. It's just a good reference point that he begins and he ends with a common theme, and it's throughout the whole Word of God. The one on the platform, so here it is. I want to hear something. This is what I thought was powerful. So I use this picture as well. And it's not the right one, but it's what I could find. And that is, when John saw the angel, he bowed down to worship. And the angel said, "Do not worship me. I am the messenger." And the reason I want to highlight that, one is because it's in the Word. That's a good thing to do. But the second is, I chased after people and put them on pedestals. They put themselves on pedestals at times, I grant you that. But I went to conferences. I was a conference junkie. I was going wherever it seemed God's presence was at. Yet here it says, don't worship that. Worship God. God is here within us. We don't need to go to others or run after, as I did on my journey. Because I thought the closer I could get to them, the closer I could get to God. But God opened his heart to allow me and invite me in. So this begins with the first thing, and that's the positioning. What is the position? The second bullet here says way in which one placed or arranged, attitude, right? How they poise or posture themselves. It's a direction relative to one's surroundings. That's a good thing to look at. Now, this is out of Webster and Collegiate and a few other ones. So what was the position of worship? And this is what I want to kind of highlight in reference to our worship process. And I've mentioned to the worship team before, but I'm going to step on some toes, and I'm okay with that. And you can step on mine, it's fine. I walk on the bottoms anyway. But the fact is, the worship team is not here to lead us into worship. Based on my research, based on my opinion, okay? I caveat that. I've heard that growing up. But if I was been going and talking and interviewing different people and everything else, their responsibility is to enter into their place of worship and have an invitation for us to step in. They're to be immersed in his presence and allow us to receive the overflow. If it's their responsibility to lead me into worship, it takes away my responsibility to enter into relationship. Because that's where I've been the first 60 years. Okay? So just want to throw that out. I get the fact that they're there, but I love what this team does. And often having their eyes closed, they're in a place of worship. And as I was mentioning with them, when I first saw, I can't think of her name. What was her name? Remember? No. The first one that I was talking about this morning, Scott. Kim Walker, thank you. When I first met Kim Walker, 10 years ago or anything else, one of the things I just loved about her worship, songs are great, by the way. They're entertaining, they're encouraging, they're engaging. But she would turn to the right and just look up and never look at the audience because it wasn't about them. And that's what really struck a chord in me, that she had a heart of worship because she was, yes, singing, she was playing, she was doing whatever, but her focus was on the Lord and the Lord alone, and would shift and see only him and just worship. Too often it becomes that entertainment, and she didn't want a distraction. And I'm choosing to step out of distraction as well. So the first thing we look at is it's a process of ascending. And talking to a couple different people, and I think Stephen was one of the ones that brought some of the attentions about, and what he was sharing, which was a powerful thing, is realizing this, that the singers, the worshipers, that was their appointed duty, and we got that. But it was a lifestyle. It wasn't a Sunday morning or Shabbat, Saturday activity, okay? It was a daily, continual preparation. And Kim, as he mentioned, which was great because I taught about it, but Rev Shabbat, Friday evening, Friday night, as they entered into that place, they began their sacrifice of worship to lead, to involve, and to be ready to bring the presence of the Shekinah glory into the temple. So they had a desire and a petition in that place. Who may ascend unto the hill of the Lord, and who may stand in the holy place? One who has clean hands and a pure heart. This is Psalms, written by David, that had blood on his hands. But who can ascend? And the hope in that is that we can all ascend when we surrender and release our past, our sins, and are cleansed by the Holy Spirit and God's love. As I mentioned, I talked to several people, let the worshipers arise, and what I want to highlight in this is, as I approach these people I have relationship with or encounter, and actually just met Stephen here, right after I got the kind of the word that you're going to be teaching on worship, and we're having a conversation, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to meet you. This is an appointment to learn and to grow. I reached out to other people, and I said, hey, look, this is what I'm doing, and I don't know what to do. I need your insight. What does worship look like for you? What does worship mean for you? As a worship leader, what is your responsibility? And all three pretty much said, I'll have to get back to you. All three of them said, this shifted a lot inside of me. For me to really, truly understand who I am and what I need to worship. And we had great dialogue and discussions. And each of them was inspired to step into a whole new game of what worship is and what they can give and contribute to others. Let the worshiper in you arise. So often I didn't sound off, I didn't sing loud, I didn't whatever, because concerned about what others may think. But God says, make a joyful sound unto me. Worship with all of your heart. Love the Lord thy God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind. And there's a sequence to that for a reason. Well, the temple was a place set aside for worship. It's where they entered in. It's what they did. It was Jerusalem, right? So everyone knew. And it was also a specific place, order, and time of which that happened. Yet it was interesting that in this place, at this time, the woman at the well, the Samaritan, posed a question. We worship on this mountain, Jacob's well, this place of the forefathers. You say you have to worship over there. There was a discord and a division amongst the Samaritans, which were half Jews, by the way. A time is coming. True worshipers will worship in spirit and in truth. We are created in his image, in a spiritual being, in a physical world. He gave us his Holy Spirit to empower us to connect and be in relationship with him. Interestingly, the word truth And we'll talk about that later on. But the fact is, in this place, what I discovered was some other interesting facts. When Yeshua gave up his breath, or cried out in a loud voice, and gave up his spirit, the veil was torn. Wait a minute. So we're to worship in spirit and in truth. The place of worship was Jerusalem, the temple. When he gave up his spirit, and by the way, the Holy Spirit descends later upon us, but he gives up his spirit, the veil is torn, and no longer are we limited to a minimized access. Just an interesting perspective. I get to choose to walk and figure that out, because we are now set apart for worship. We're not confined to where we worship. Interestingly enough, that he said specifically to the Samaritan woman, the time is at hand, the time is now, that there will be a place where it's not the place, it's the person is worship. Tearing of their garments, exposing the hearts, vulnerability. Leah talked about this a little while ago. This whole process is an invitation. And throughout the Old Testament, the first ones, it's all talking about the kings. Rending their garments, tearing their garments, exposing their heart because of the grieved heart that they believe God has and that they have. And exposure, vulnerability. Yet, when the veil was torn, yes, I believe it was God rendering his own, exposing his heart, all of that as well as then creating an invitation or an access for us to enter in. So this shifts our posture. First one was the position, where. Now it's the posture, the attitude. It is said that the posture is actually our alignment, our congruence, our agreement in every part of essence of our body. So is it true that our attitude defines our altitude, right? How far we're going to ascend up, how far we're going to elevate, how far we're going to elevate God is all about our attitude. And how much we trust and believe and surrender and release. A friend of mine, Frank, desperate to hear the Lord, was over on a mission trip, over about wanting to know the truth, wanting to know what the next step. Lord, show me. And he was agonizing. And he had a relationship with God. And God says, worship me. He shifted. It wasn't about his needs. It wasn't about his concerns. It wasn't about what the next step was. It was about entering into an encounter in a place of worship. As he worshiped, his heart came aligned to what God's truth was for the next step. And he could walk in confidence. Because it wasn't about in the head thinking what I need to do next. It was about entering into the heart in the presence of God, that his heart would lead where he would go as God revealed. Thought it was interesting. The blessing, the Aaronic blessing. First of all, it says, may the Lord, in most translations in the Hebraic. May him. It also says, bless the Lord bless you. The definitive in this process is the fact that it's an invitation and it's a declaration at the same time. May the Lord bless you, meaning are you in the right position that you are in under his covering, that he can bless you. Therefore, bless you. Yevarichecha, kaha, and then another word is yesah at the end. First one, it's all about lifting up, elevating, and being adored. As a father lifts up a child, all of it is about face-to-face interaction, eye-to-eye and heart-to-heart connection. God looks upon us. The first word is actually bended knee in the Hebrew. The second word is lifting his face or countenance upon us, which means he elevates and adores his creation because his creation is a reflection of him. And he's honored and he's overjoyed because of who we are in relationship with him. That is a form of worship. It doesn't mean he's worshiping us. It doesn't mean he's saying, oh my gosh, this is it's not. It means that he delights, just as a father delights in their son or daughter when they've done whatever, even when they've done wrong, even when they've gotten hurt, we still lift them up and care and love from a full heart because they reflect our image. How much more would God lift us up, elevate us, that we can reflect his image in whatever we're doing and in what he's called us to do. So I like words. Anybody got figured that one out yet? Okay, so I came up with this other one, okay? We're not to elevate ourselves. We're not to put ourselves on a pedestal. We're not to put ourselves pridefully and put God down disrespectfully. We're not to elevate ourselves, we're not to elevate others, and we're not to elevate things. No idol worship. And we're not to be passive or stagnant, therefore also not idle. We are to worship in a body that's advancing. Worship is about warfare. One of the things that I got involved in that released me to worship was worshiping with flags, teaching, working with them and everything else. And this was one of the things that connected my wife and I, because very few people, and they get away from you at times, and it's okay, because it's not about doing it right. It's not about being perfect. It's about being in his presence. What I learned is this is an extension farther than my arms can reach. It's an outward expression. It's an extension of who we are. And in many cases, it's also a battle cry. Worship is worship, as I put in here, right? It's a warship going and advancing the kingdom. It's a battle, spiritual battle that's going on. And it's amazing how much worship breaks the spiritual hold, breaks the captivity, shatters the enemy's suppression, and advances God's army. It's just a thought. It changes the atmosphere, and that's what we are. And I love, the Lord had told me a long time ago, because I got all these degrees, right? I must be a thermometer. And he says, I called you to be a thermostat. It's not measuring the temperature. It's changing the atmosphere. When you step in, what do you bring in? My presence or your fear and insecurity? We're all called to advance. We're all called to issue in. We're all called to step in. Whatever it is that he's called us for, to glorify him and the things. David is an example of this. Recklessly abandoned, right? Joyfully worshiping and praying. When he's bringing the tabernacle in, he stripped himself of certain dignity, fully exposed and surrendered and joyfully abandoned to God. That's not me, but I'm getting there. Because I realize it's not about me entertaining or me looking good. It's about me entering in. And I want his approval, his acceptance, and his delight. This is my son, who I am well pleased because of a heart of worship. And we are called to worship him with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your mind. It's a command, by the way. And I think the order has some precedence. It doesn't say to worship him with your mind first. Align your heart, and your mind and everything else will come into agreement. So there is a specific order. The next is participation. Now, I think there's a grave difference between participant and participation. One is the noun, one is the verb. One is it just there, the other is actively engaged. It's not a spectator sport. And we're to really be a mental state of entering in to that presence. Now, what I want to hit on worship here is the issuing in part, and I talked about that a little bit before in reference to too often it becomes this entertainment. It becomes this everyone engaged, but not engaged, maybe engaged with our heads or anything else, but we've abandoned that, but have we really connected our heart with God? Or are we just listening to the good music, which it can be, and it can be encouraging. But I think there's a context. that needs to be set to encounter, which we'll go to in a moment. It's the immersed, as I mentioned before, in the overflowing of his presence that we get an opportunity through invitation to step into. The invitation to receive so that we have a personal responsibility and a personal encounter if we choose. Because he surrenders to our will and he delights when we come into that presence with him. Worship is at the core of everything about who we are. I've studied all kinds of stuff in reference to biology, neurotransmitter, all these different things of evolution, creation, all those different things. There is none like us. We are so uniquely different. Worship is one of those aspects that we can come to this place of emotional attachment to the Creator. And he does that through who he created for that purpose. Spontaneous harmony, resonant alignment was something I found to be very fascinating for me. When I finally got out of my way and got into that place, it was interesting as I would then vocalize more because it was more about him than me. More people were excited what I carried into the place. And what I also noticed is that people near me would all begin to start harmonizing, and not intentionally, but that frequencies will start coming together in a balance because we choose to surrender. As I mentioned before, Steve Pratt has on these Saturdays, I want to say it here, I love what they're saying, it's a little small here, but I believe worship is his invitation to his encounter into his environment. It's all about him and not about us. We end our services often, if not always, with our Father who art in heaven. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven is part of that passage, right? Worship as in heaven we get to bring here on earth and enter into that place. So application, so we can get moving forward. Again, the application is how do we take this information? If this information, in fact, has some relevance, some truth to it, some changing or turning, shifting, what is our position, our posture, and our participation? What are we called to do with that? How do we step in? I love it when people say, here's what you do, but you don't know how to get there. I've been there, believe me. That's why I'm saying it. And I share with you that it's to close your eyes and imagine. He's given us imagination. As Chris was leading worship, picture this. See where God's presence is. Because he's here with us. They've invited him. They've welcomed him. They've issued him in. We get to step in, but we also got to step out of our way. So create a personal encounter with who he is. I'm going to briefly go over, and I'm going to ask you guys to just close your eyes for a moment, and I'm going to show you the first thing. These are the words from the songs from Petra. Take me in. And I want you to just close your eyes. I'm going to read through the words. I want you to imagine what it is that would look like for you to do those things. Take me past the outer courts, into the holy place, past the brazen altar. Lord, I want to see your face. Pass me by the crowds of people, the priests who sing your praise. I hunger and thirst for your righteousness, and it's only found one place. Take me into the Holy of Holies. Take me in by the blood of the Lamb. Take me in to the Holy of Holies. Take the coal, cleanse my lips. Here I am. Take me past the outer courts, into the holy place, past the brazen altar. Lord, I want to see your face. Pass me by the crowds of people, the priests who sing your praise. I hunger and thirst for your righteousness, and it's only found one place. Take me into the Holy of Holies. Take me in by the blood of the Lamb. Take me into the Holy of Holies. Take the coal. Cleanse my lips. Here I am. He's repeating the theme for a reason. Take me past the outer courts, into the holy place, past the brazen altar. Lord, I want to see your face. Take me into the Holy of Holies. Take me in by the blood of the Lamb. Take me in to the Holy of Holies. Here I am. It's an invitation. It's a journey. It's a process into his presence. The next one I'm going to go in. I didn't even advance everything, so I got to get ahead of myself. Sorry. The next one is Matt Redman, Heart of Worship. I was here 3-4 weeks ago. They're playing this song, took out the camera, took a picture because the Lord was saying, this is a song. And it was exactly reflecting what it was. So I also Googled, what is the history of this song? Well, it was the apathy in his church in a period of worship revival that this song was birthed. Because the pastor says there's something dynamic missing. Dynamic is also the same word we get dynamite, which means something eruptive, explosive, or powerful. Missing. We are performing. We are not encountering. And he removed all of the sound systems, all of the equipment, all of the systems that were blocking them from encountering his presence. And this is what he wrote. As you close your eyes, heart of worship. When the music fades, all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's worth, that will bless your heart. I will bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within. Though the way things appear, you're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship. And it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus. King of endless worth, no one could express how much you deserve. Though I'm weak and poor, all I have is yours. Every single breath, I'll bring you more than a song. For a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within. So the way things appear, you're looking into my heart. Yea, I'm coming back to that heart of worship. And it's all about you. It is all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the things I have made it when it's all about you. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'll bring you more than a song. I'll bring you more than a song. You're looking into my heart. You're looking into my heart. I'll bring you more than a song. I'll bring you more than a song. So I would like the worship team to come up, and actually they're going to lead us or share with us those two songs again. And I invite you to really enter into that place. Enter into that encounter. Visualize, and I'm not here to, I'm going to say it, I don't care if you sing. Close your eyes, encounter where he is, where you are, and see him there with you when you're in his presence. If you know the words, great. If you just need to hear the words and visualize, better. He's created us with imagination so that we can imagine him with us.
With something that represents his glory. You see, when me and Michael were talking, he spoke on spirit, and he left for me to speak on truth. The mechanism of our soul is what we have here on the earth now, our mind, will, and emotion. This is what activates and chooses to worship. As we have in Psalms 100, it actually speaks on enter into his gates with thanksgiving, his courts with praise. And then as take me into his holy of holies, that we would actually enter into his presence beyond the practice of our service. The beauty is, I can speak in simplicity. Thanksgiving is speaking on the goodness of God. Greatness is our praise to him. The greatness being elevated and magnified in this place. But worship, we worship because he is holy. Okay? We worship because he is holy. It is the lepers that were crying out from a distance from God, and he still heard their plea, but their ability to worship was far from him. And it was Martha and Mary on that day after Lazarus was raised from the dead that Mary sat at his feet the second time in Scripture. And if you know anything about praise, it's called a grain offering. And first, the unleavened bread, which was milled down to the smallest, represents the body. Even the wind could carry it. But the second piece was always his oil. And the oil represented his spirit, as we talked about the spirit and truth. But what we have here is they take a grain offering of that milled grain in its small perspective with the oil, and they'd cast it upon the fire and incense, and it would burn as an offering to the Lord. But it was his presence, which was the fragrant and extravagant aroma of frankincense. This is still expensive today. And in that alabaster jar, and in that moment of worship, she poured it out upon the feet of Jesus and all it's worth. And why did she do that? Because you can smell the extravagance. You can see the relevance of everything he has done for us. And it's no longer the practice of service, but just the elevation of his presence that takes us in further and deeper into worship with him. And David was a mighty man. And as it was brought in 2 Samuel, as he danced, he was a mighty man of valor. I believe every bone in his body was moving for the Spirit of God in that moment. And the criticism that came from his spouse left her barren because of her words. That's how much our God is elevated. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker, for he is our God. So as we enter into this time of worship, I really felt like the Lord would open this altar and a place in which you can come, because every word that is used in worship has a posture and movement that is a part of its definition. Worship always is a moving activity towards God. And as I was talking with the worship team this morning, if I was to go and buy an airplane ticket every week, take my time to fly to Hawaii and spend the money and then fly home and yet never touch ground and just fly on back, you would ask me why I'm wasting my time and my money, right? But that is the picture of the church. We come, but we do not come into his presence. We do not come in to be transformed. We do not come in to allow for every bone in our body to be used for his goodness and for his glory. And that is what we want to do today. And we know that we have elevated need in this community and body for healing, but he is still good. We know that we have financial needs, but he is still good. But beyond his goodness, he is great. He is the majesty, the King of kings and the Lord of lords. Our time of worship is not about song. It is about fully aligning our spirit, that mechanism of our soul to say, Lord, awaken my spirit to be in line with your spirit. And the last thing I'll say, the cherubs have 4 wings and the seraphim have 6. The seraphim stand as the 4 living creatures and they say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. They've been saying that since the beginning of time, and they will continue to do it for all of eternity. And they have 6 wings, 2 to cover the face and 2 to cover the feet, and only 2 to fly. And why? Because in reverence and posture, they revere him, and only 2 for service. But how many use all your wings for service and not any for his reverence? So today, as we just stand and posture ourselves, come let us kneel before the Lord, our God, our Maker. Come let us bow down before him as we are taken in past the service of praise. May we enter into his holy place. Let's worship together.
And take me past the outer court and through the holy place, past the brazen altar. Lord, I want to see your face. Pass me by the crowds of people, the priests sing their praise. I hunger and thirst for your righteousness, and it's only found one place. So take me to the holy of holies. Take me by the blood of the Lamb. Take me to the holy of holies. Take the cold, cleanse my lips, here I am. Take me past the outer courts and through the holy place, past the brazen altar. Lord, I want to see your face. Pass me by the crowd of people, priests sing their praise, and I hunger and thirst for your righteousness, but it's only found one place. Take me to the holy of holies. Take me by the blood of the Lamb. Take me to the holy of holies. Take the cold, cleanse my lips, here I am. Take me to the holy of holies. Take me by the blood of the Lamb. Take me to the holy of holies. Take the cold, cleanse my lips, here I am. Would you take me to the holy of holies? May we repent. Take me in by the blood of the Lamb. Let him increase your faith. Take me to the holy of holies. Spirit and truth, Lord. Take the cold, cleanse my lips, here I am. So take me into the holy of holies, and take me in by the blood of the Lamb, only by your blood. Take me to the holy of holies, and take the cold, cleanse my lips, here I am. It's the coal that cleanses our lips, Lord. But Lord, that we would make a choice with everything that's within us. Everything that's within our being belongs to you. Only you. It really isn't about the song, but the posture of your heart. He just longs to be your God. Look at the extravagance of what he went through. It was the extravagance of sacrifice and grief that Mary was able to display even before his death as she poured that alabaster jar at his feet. May your sacrifice be equal to that in heart today. When the music fades, all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's a word that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. Put everybody else aside and just focus on him. You search much deeper within, through the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. Does the aroma fill this place? I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the things I song without words now, that you would just describe in your heart to him is worthy. Father, we just sing a new song to you this morning. You're worthy, God. All of our gifts be a form of worship to him this morning. Every act of service, every act of praise. May we just lift our hands to him. Let's extol his name together. This may be new to you, but he commands us in his word, in our posture. Daddy, Abba, we lift up our gifts of praise to you this morning. We're coming back to your heart, Lord. Coming back to your heart, Lord. In our worship to you, God, let our hearts and our minds be focused in on you. Looking into my heart, Lord, I give honor and praise and sacrifice to you, God, for what you've done for me. Worthy of all our praise. Worthy of all our praise, God. Worthy of honor and praise. Oh,